Woo, that's right. The conversational topic of the day is we're going to be talking economics, folks. We're going to be talking economics for the people out there. We're going to be talking tariffs and inflation. Going to be talking a little bit about what they are, what it's all about, a little informational section today that we can talk about. So, step one, at the most basic of principles, inflation is something that at first I did not think confused a lot of people as to what it was or how it works. But inflation is simply the term that means that prices are going up. It itself is not raising any prices. It is the term for prices going up. That is what it actually means. There are a bunch of things that can cause inflation, but inflation itself is just the term that means the cost of X thing is going up. And usually it means the cost of basically everything is going up. Goods as a whole. A set of goods in your basket, if you will. Those things are going up. There's two forms that oftentimes you'll see reported, which is basically inflation as a whole and inflation minus energy costs. The minus energy costs inflation is really a cop-out answer for tracking the numbers, because Lord knows that gas is incredibly important to the average person, right? So like if you factor out gas prices and if you factor out electricity, like if you factor out energy costs, like, oh boy, I'm glad that, oftentimes you will see those two numbers reported and the minus energy cost number will be a little bit lower in terms of total inflation. And people will use that one. And it's like, well, it doesn't help you if your electric bill just went up $20 and gas is an extra $40 a month for you. Like that's, you can't just factor it out because you don't want to. I've never understood why that's a thing. I mean, why it is a thing is because those are more volatile numbers. But if those numbers are volatile and they're up, well, that still affects your life in a very drastic way. So I still think that it's the ultimate cop-out in the reporting of inflation numbers. So really a bit of a silly one on that. But, so that is inflation. Inflation just means the cost of goods, services, things in your daily life is going up, right? Your mortgage might be going up. The price of groceries is going up. The price of going out to eat is going up. Price of going bowling is going up, right? Things are going up in price. When inflation comes down, so that what we just talked about, I do think that most people understand what we just talked about. This is the part where I think people get really confused on inflation, which is there seems to be a pretty big, I would say, fundamental misunderstanding, at least in the U.S. Obviously can't speak for worldwide. This is just, U.S. focused. There seems to be a misunderstanding that inflation coming down, right? Say inflation was 4% year over year. Just to throw out a number. Bringing inflation down to 3% year over year, right? The inflation has reduced by a fairly significant amount. Prices do not go down 1%. This is something that I think really fundamentally people are confused about in the US. It means that the rate of increase of prices is slowing. The rate of increase is slowing. In order for goods to cost less money, you would have to have a negative inflation number, which is essentially never going to happen because there's a variety of reasons why you don't want a negative inflation number, a part of which is there's no reason to spend money in the economy because the money that you have now is actually going to be worth more tomorrow than it is today. So why would you spend money today when you could spend it tomorrow and it'll be worth more? Negative inflation is generically considered bad for economies. The exact number of what is a good inflation number is disputed. You know, a lot of people say it's 2%. I'm not an economist. I can't tell you I can't, factor in a personal opinion on that, other than most people say a number around 2-ish% is a healthy number for an economy. Your money isn't deflating that fast, but it still encourages people to spend money to go buy a new couch, to go buy a new bed, go out, spend money on goods and services. Don't just hoard because tomorrow your money will be worth more. You got to spend it today because you're going to get the most value out of spending it today, which is good for the economy. It bumps up GDP, all that kind of stuff, right? But as a whole, people have to understand that conceptually, once prices go up, they're never going to come back down. When prices come back down in some sort of drastic way, it's basically due to like some sort of systematic collapse of something. The housing market, massive financial crisis, housing market crashes, prices of houses goes down. That's great. But it was just a shit show all over, right? All over, right? Like, there comes consequences when those types of things happen. Now, a lot of times there's going to be corrections, right? Stock market goes up, stock market goes down. It goes up for a long time. It has crashed. That's just the cycle of economics, right? But in general, prices are going to go up for forever. It's just that you would like them to go up at a smaller, steadier rate so people know how much things are going to cost in general year over year. So all of those pretty hardcore years of COVID inflation, right? Those numbers don't just go away. So when inflation goes down, and it's been, it's not, if last time I checked, it was still in the 3s, which is still way above where you would want it. But now the Fed has to deal with unemployment and inflation. These are basically the two things that the Fed chair can deal with. And they essentially have two levers, right? There's a bunch, the Senate can do things, the president can do things. There's a bunch of things that can be done regarding economics, but the Fed basically gets the brunt of the action. And they basically have two things that they can do, which is they can basically increase or they can decrease on the amount of percentage that the government is using as the baseline for the banks, right? They can increase and decrease that number. They decrease that number, it puts more money into the ecosystem, which causes, things like stock market generically to go up. It causes businesses to generically be able to purchase more goods and things because they're getting it at a lower rate. Generically, this is also tied with mortgages. It's not like a 1-to-1, but generically it also means like things like mortgage rates go down. But it also has a unemployment and employment impact. And if they do the opposite, right? They raise it. Typically, works for things like the stock market takes money out of the economy in that regard. Typically helps better with unemployment, employment. So it's basically those two things that the Fed can do. And if you have rising unemployment and a lot of inflation, you end up in a situation called stagflation, which is basically the worst of both worlds, where the Fed only has one thing that they can do. They can lower or upper, or technically they can stay the same. There's a third option, right? But they can only fight one of those battles at a single time, given their tool set, which is literally plus or minus a percentage number, which is usually 0.25%. In extreme situations, you'll see a 0.5% move, but almost always is a 0.25% move at the Fed. So right now, unemployment is rising and inflation is still above the goal of 2%. Like I said, I didn't check the numbers this week. Last time I checked, it was around like 3.6. But that number can change a lot from month to month, depending especially with things like tariffs. So what is a tariff? A tariff is a tax paid by the company that is importing a set of goods, right? So we're going to use some easy numbers here just to make the math easy off the top of our head. You're a company and you sell a good that costs $10, right? And you import that good from a country that is not where you live. In this case, once again, we're going to use the United States. So you're a United States company and you're importing a good, you're getting it shipped over to you. At the port, you are going to have to pay a tax. You're going to have to pay a tariff on that good depending on that particular good and that particular country's rate of tariffs. So let's assume that an object had a 50% tariff on it a year ago. So that cost you $10 to buy, and then it cost you another $5 in taxes. You have paid $15 for this item, okay? So maybe you sell that item for $20. You're making $5 on that item. If tariffs go up by an additional, let's call 50% to make the math easy. Now it's 100% tariff on the item. You paid $10 for the item. Now you have to pay a $10 tax on the item. The total cost of the item is now $20 for you to physically get it into your inventory, right? Which means your previous pricing of $20 would make you as a business $0. So you have to increase the price of the item in order to maintain your profit margin. So in that case, if you wanted to make the exact same amount of money, you would increase the amount the item cost by $5. Now the item is $25. The consumer is the one that is now taking in the new cost of that item. This item that they used to buy for $15, they're now buying for $25. So the business pays the tax on the front end in order to physically get the item into the country. But then the consumer is the one that is actually going to pay the tax in the long run because the business is going to pass on that tax to the consumer so that way their profit margins don't go down. Now, what oftentimes happens on top of that, and this is twofold different things. One is if you are a small ma and pa business, you get doubly screwed on this. One, because you probably don't have as big of a sales margin, right? You probably don't have as big as an online presence. You're a lot more reliant on people physically coming into a storefront. And you don't have the ability to stock up on goods. So for a lot of things that we've seen, tariffs from, many months ago that, to be fair, have gotten delayed and put back on and delayed and put back on. And we're not going to get into that right now because that's a whole separate thing. But a variety of tariffs have been added to the U.S. this year, on and off, some more on, some more off. If I recall, on Friday, we were adding another 100% until this weekend when we tweeted that we're not again. It's a whole thing. The point being, really large retailers like Walmart, for example, could get in massive orders of products before those tariffs were going to go into effect, which means they had a warehouse space to store all this stuff. They had the money up front to buy all this stuff, and then they could store it and keep those goods in order to continue to give you those items at relatively the same prices. People that have 1 store, 2 stores, 3 stores obviously could not do this because they didn't have the money up front to purchase all these items to store, and they didn't have the room to store them, the warehouses, which means that smaller businesses got doubly, triply, quadruply screwed at this deal compared to big businesses, which were able to front load a bunch of costs in order to get those objects into the United States before, say, the price of it goes up 50% on a tariff, right? Now, the problem is a lot of those companies that have done this, instead of hitting you with a price increase right up front, right? We'll go back to our $10. Instead of that object, which cost $15 for you to buy, jumping up to $25 overnight, what we have seen a lot of companies in the US, the big conglomerates, you could call them a monopoly if you wanted to, I won't stop you, increase their price from $15 to $17 one month, right? To $19 the next month, 21, 23, slowly increasing that price up to where it was going to be once they had to start getting in the products utilizing the tariffs. Now, this is extra janky and extra screwy because for a lot of these giant companies, were slowly increasing these prices on a product that they actually weren't paying the new tariffs on yet because they had gotten it in early. That product that cost them $15 to get in, they were now selling for $17, $19 or $10 to get in. We're now selling for $17, $19, $21, $23. But they had front loaded all the costs, which means they were very literally just raising the price of the item without even a tariff on it yet because they had it already here. They had already held the item and gotten them in before the tariffs, which means their profit margin was actually skyrocketing off of these items. And it's not until the second wave comes in that they have now aligned their product to be at the appropriate price in a slower, more gentler motion over time. But they don't have to stop at that $25 marker. Because then they get to say, oh, well, the tariffs have been hitting us really hard. You know, it was $24. Now it's going to have to be $28. But the original math was if they wanted to make the same profit margin on the item, it should have actually just been only $25. So that is a separate issue of businesses gouging prices, which is something that small businesses can't do. Your uncle that runs a store, your grandma that had a store, they can't do that. But big giant businesses like Walmart, etc., that you basically don't have any other option but to shop at them. If you live out here in Arkansas, man, it's Walmartville. Your options are to shop at Walmart or to suck your own nuts for sustenance. Those are your two options, okay? Not judging. Do either one. Cool with me. But those are your two options for basically getting groceries in Arkansas. There is essentially no competition, right? So when those prices go up, you have no option but to go buy those items that are now at a much higher price. So tariffs are inherently inflationary, which is kind of the point of this TED Talk. We talked about inflation, what it is, how it works, the reason why inflation going down doesn't mean that prices go down. Tariffs themselves are a tax. Those taxes are inflationary on the actual price of the goods, and that price gets passed on to the consumer, even if it takes 3 months, 6 months, a year for the company to slowly transition that price over to the consumer, compared to a mom and pop shop, which would have to upfront that price and immediately increase something 25, 50%, etc. And so, to wrap it all up, with Hender's point, this brings us to basically the end game, which is, say, hypothetically, you give it another 3 years, you got a new president, right? New president gets elected, maybe Senate, maybe House, maybe they shift around, maybe they look a little bit different politically, right? Maybe the tariffs get reduced or eliminated altogether on various countries, right? They're never going to go away entirely because a tariff's true purpose and its most effective purpose is to be used as essentially a punishment or a bargaining chip on countries that we consider like you know what? I'm just going to bad. Countries that we consider bad. It does, whether they are or not just bad in general, right? Maybe it's a country committing a genocide. Maybe it's a country that, said something we didn't like. It technically doesn't even matter. The scale of it, traditionally, we use it as a form of leverage to make a different country do what we want by saying, well, you produce this good that we buy. We're going to make it inordinately expensive in order for Americans to not buy that object. Of course, the other way that it is also used is in a similar weapon-like manner, but specifically to increase the amount of that product that is made in America to be purchased. It's more expensive to make things in America. It's cheaper to make it in a lot of other places. If you put a giant tariff that makes it more expensive to buy the item outside of country, maybe you buy it within country. That is kind of an old thing that we don't do as much anymore because America just isn't so much a manufacturing society anymore. We just are a service-based economy. We're not a manufacturing-based economy anymore. And a lot of people would love to go back to a manufacturing-based economy, but it's kind of one of those things that once you pass that stage of like capitalism, you don't really go back down. It's not like, you know what I'm saying? It's like you've kind of climbed the next rung. You don't really go back down. And we've kind of seen that system, plenty of people have tried to bring back manufacturing. It's just one of those things where you kind of have to do a new tier of manufacturing, right? You can't really go backwards in time. Like if you want to be at the forefront of batteries right now and like things that are going to go like into electric vehicles or like solar panel production, like that kind of stuff is still in manufacturing. It's a higher paid job, that kind of stuff. And it's something that is generically more expensive, so you can afford to make it here. It can be more expensive and it can still be okay compared to other things, which are basically always going to be cheaper as they're made abroad with currencies that are worth less and paid less. And, you know, that's not even getting into like human rights violations and stuff of other countries. That's just like as streamlined as possible. But regardless, the point being, if those tariffs do get removed one day, is a business going to lower the price of an item? This good used to cost $15. They got 100% tariff. Now they started charging $28 for that item. Hypothetically, if that tariff were to get removed entirely, because it could, it's not like, you know, mostly these have been made through executive actions recently. It used to have to be that Congress had to do it, but then the Supreme Court decided that presidents have all-powerful ruling authority and that they get to be like Sauron's eye and kind of decide anything that they want to do. So we used to designate that power to the Senate, so there used to have to be more considerations in order to get this stuff done. But if those tariffs go away, I'll bet all of my dollars versus all of your dollars that the price is never going to go back down. Because why would it? If you're still having to buy the item and they're still the only one in your area providing the item, you're just going to buy the item. Your options are to basically stop buying it altogether, or that's that. Once the price is built into the economy, that is the new forever baseline. That's it. That's the new forever baseline. If you're lucky, you'll get a little bit of a movement, right? Maybe somebody uses it as a marketing campaign. Oh, tariffs are done. Look at this item. It's 10% off now. But in reality, it should be closer to like 30% off. You know, will that happen? Probably. You know, look at all this. We got 10% rollbacks on everything. Look at all these great deals. And everybody's going to be like, wow, look at all these great deals. I'm saving $3. But in reality, you're actually still being charged an additional $7 for that item. So that is the current state. That is kind of what we're looking at. And that has been our Twitchy talk for the day, folks. If you would like to take part in more Twitchy talks, we're doing these at the end of streams right now. We also have a channel, !Twitchy takes in the chat, and it brings up our YouTube channel, which we are uploading all of these videos to as well. So we've got our primary 2 YouTube channels that we use for Deadlock, of course, all of our sweet video game content, but we've also got a 3rd channel that we have made that we're strictly going to use for these little political economy, frownomy, bonomy, wanamy talks.